Hello, everyone. Welcome to Orlando Python for October 2023. We're going to be taking a look at the Rust lint. It's more than a linter, but it is really designed to replace a whole bunch of tools. Really, like at bare bones, most people can replace their entire Python post development, like pre-commit tooling with just Ruff and MyPy. Uh, you can use black as well. That's what I like to do. But Ruff is really designed to be an incredibly fast replacement for a lot of other linting libraries. And there's not 100% overlap, and depending on what we want to look at, we can see some of those examples. But Ruff is it's written in Rust, so it is very fast. It's also really good at caching, which some other linting libraries I have seen are not as good at. So you can see on our homepage here. So this is linting the C Python code base from scratch. The Pylint takes over 60 seconds. You can get Flake8, which is actually one of these built-ins, the standard library, I believe. And Ruff is less than a second, 0.29 seconds. A lot of what I have heard about it is people have to intentionally add things into their code to make sure it's working the first time around because it's just that fast. So that that's a general introduction to this. What I really would like to show, because we could look at the documentation, looking at the tutorials, and yeah, we'll look at this a little bit. But it would be really cool to spend some of this time looking at how to actually get this set up with a project. And I have here a code base that we created almost exactly 2 years ago, where we have this Vue.js application with a Python backend. This is very, very simple, but we would be able to convert what we have here and, well, not even convert. We'd be able to take this code base, which I can already look at and know that Ruff is going to have some issues with it. If for no other reason that there are no doc strings, because we just really hammered this thing out in an hour and a half. So I think that would be a fun way of having an introduction to this particular tool. Something else that's really interesting. This is the second library that we have looked at that is using the relatively new pyproject.toml syntax. And if you're not familiar with it, this is the new conglomeration replacement for setup.py and some of these other like Pylint, like .pylint RC and all these other. They're trying. The community has settled on this standard currently to put all of that into a single configuration file that all of these libraries can reference without conflicting with each other for the most part. So let's take a quick look at that. I'm going to switch my screen share so that I can just have my whole desktop here. So we can just show everything running front to back. So this code base, we can quickly just grab this and we can get downloaded. and open up our editor here. So there's our front end. We don't really need to worry about that. We're just going to focus on our Python code here. It's not a whole lot, but this is all that we need to do at the time to get a minimal fast API application set up with REST API endpoints. Now, since we were doing this real quickly at the time, we have our good old requirements.txt file here. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, all right. So we have our requirements.txt. Well, the first thing that we need to do is we're going to add a pyproject.toml file here. And believe is no, this package is project. So I have a little bit of a tool here that does all of these configuration auto-completes for you. I think this is now built into the standard VS Code Python package or add-on. So it's able to recognize these now, which is a huge help. So we can do things like requires Python 3 point greater than or equal to 3.8, things like that. You can have like the name of the package. Let's just call it app for the time being. I don't quite remember what it was. But there's a whole bunch of other things that would need to have in here. However, we don't really need that for this. What we do need in order to make Ruff work is going to be a tool.ruff. And I think there's someone still trying to get through for asking a question. No? All right. I'm going to take a step back here. So we have a .toml and all this pip documentation. I'm trying, yeah, here we go. This requires build system requires. I'm just going to copy this so we have a little bit of a thing. Actually, no, I got something better we can take a look at. I'm going to pull up some library code here because a actual production example of this kind of configuration file I think is going to be a lot more helpful. So this is the PyProject file of a library that I maintain that I've talked about in previous meetings. This particular one uses Poetry for its dependency management or project management. So we have everything in there in a tool.poetry, which includes things like all of our dependencies, so on and so forth, including dev dependencies, our build system here, as well as things like our black configuration, any PyTest coverage, MyPy, all of these different tools. And these PO tasks, which I think is something else that we can look at here. But I know that pip had a specific Python requirements. Project.toml requires dependency, something to that effect. But even pip knows how to use this now, which I would like to include here. Medium strikes again. This is what we do as developers. Okay, so I guess it's just build system, and then I think there was developer dependencies elsewhere, or it's project dependencies. Hey, just a quick check. Am I coming through audio well or not, or is this other? Okay.
It's good.
Okay. I just want to check because I'm on hotel Wi-Fi right now. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And so, okay. We're just maybe I'll just end up cutting this out for the dependencies in the Py project there. I know it can do it. It's part of the build system, and that's part of the things that help you build the project, but don't actually get included in the project. What we really just need to do here, well, I think I need to configure, open up a Python file so I can actually select the interpreter that I want to use. Uh, Yeah, yeah. Nope, I want a more modern one. Let's pop it into here. We've used that in the past. And reload. There we go. So let's just quickly do a pip install Ruff, because even though Ruff is written in Rust, most of the libraries nowadays have wheels for most major platforms, so you don't actually need Rust on your machine. Oh, quick question. Why not use poetry in it? Uh, we could absolutely use poetry, and certainly over here, that's what this project is using. I did quickly want to show previously, hey, other tools use that can use the pyproject.toml for its configuration. Unfortunately, the reference that I myself have written is on my work computer, and I can't bring that up. But I know that it is possible. It's not just limited to poetry, although you absolutely could do poetry in it and have that set up. In fact, since we're not actually in the backend folder right now, uh, I'm going to quickly make sure that poetry is installed in this, which it is not. We could absolutely do like poetry in it for this, the outside of this file here. Uh, we've we have looked at poetry in it in the past as well. Uh, yeah, package name, version, description, me, although that has changed a little bit, I think. Compatible, yada yada. Uh, yeah, sure, let's do that. Do package to add. I know we're using fast API and whatever. Okay, I'll just rerun that again and skip that part. But no, no, okay. So there is that. So poetry, full system. Here we go. Let's pop you in here. So built with poetry. Now, this poetry syntax is a little bit different than if we were to do a project syntax, which is not tool specific. Uh, so that's where we get things like the name and README requires Python. These are all there and available to you. But just to keep this going, we have, so whoops, it didn't do it. Okay, so we have Ruff, and here we can have Ruff and have it check our backend app.py. Oh, it actually didn't give us anything. I add, oh, it's not, it's, there's one more command. Let's pull up our help document. It's Ruff check. That's what it is. So run Ruff on the given file or directories. It looks like that's actually the default one anyway. So we can already take a look at some of the cool things that Ruff can do, as opposed to other linters, by the way. So check is actually running the suite on your code base. And there are a bunch of configuration flags that you can have for there, some of which are hinted here because we have linting, cleaning, formatting. There are flags that you can set whenever you run to automatically clean, to automatically fix certain rules. For example, one that they talk about in the documentation because it's easy to talk about, frankly, is automatically removing missing or unused imports. And I'm sure they talk about that here. Yeah, so their demo importing an OS that is never used. So you would actually see that returned, and you could have it automatically, Ruff check fix to automatically fix certain rules. I think it was there are about 700 different patterns that Ruff is checking for, and it has rules to fix about 200 of them, I think, somewhere in there. It also includes a formatter, but by default, it doesn't override certain rule sets that include or that would be covered by other formatters like black. And they're very explicit about that. So I do want to make sure that we are seeing this run properly here. So let's do Ruff check and have it run our backend app. And that runs real quickly. So I actually want to introduce something like, yeah, let's import OS. Let's import something we're not going to use and see if it, yeah, there it goes. So we found one error. And if we run this with fix, we can see our code automatically removed that unused import. Now, there are other things that this could check for, and I actually do want to show you this in their documentation. And I think, yeah, here in the FAQ, there we go. Ruff's linter can replace a bunch of different libraries and plugins for other libraries. They primarily look at Flake 8 since that is one of the defaults, default linting tools that you'll find used in projects. So Ruff has a rule set that covers all of these Flake 8 and Flake 8 plugins, but it also includes other tools that people use like iSort. We got Pep8 naming, PyDoc style, PyUpgrade, which is a really interesting use case. But some of these are not enabled by default. Let's see. Yeah, things like Ruff is a linter, not a type checker, so you still need to use MyPy. You can still use black with it, but you don't have to. It works for all supported versions of Rust. I think we can dive into some of these configurations. Because I think, unlike Pylint, and it is clear when it's comparing it to Pylint, at the time of this writing, Pylint implements about 400 rules and Ruff implements over 700, but only about half of Pylint's rules overlap with Ruff. So there's not full one-to-one, and they are tracking which ones well, how much overlap there is. One of the things that Pylint checks for, which I thought it was going to do out of the box, but I guess not, are things like checking for doc strings, be it module doc strings up here, or class, or function doc strings, any of those. So I think it would be useful to show how we can configure Ruff in our pyproject.toml here in order to explicitly enable certain rule sets. So we can do our tool.ruff, and would you look at that? We have a couple of prefabs here that we could, if we wanted to do like tool.ruff.pylint, for example, or any of these other ones that can effectively, the goal of these subsystems, these subconfigurations, is to just take your tool.pylint and to replace it with a tool.ruff.pylint. The Ruff's documentation is very clear in that they don't support all of the configurations being brought over from one to the other, but they do support some. So let's go to here, configuration, things like rule selection. The first thing they call out are things like line length, which would have an overlap with black, for example. There's a project requires Python. Tool.ruff, line select here, rule selection. So extend select. I specifically want to find the like PyDoc style. So this, let's see, tool Ruff linter. If we head back over here, tool Ruff, is it linter? That's what's in the docs, but now it's complaining. So let's see. It's possible either the tool or the documentation is out of date. So extend include, I think it was just docs, I think. Yeah, PyDoc style. Yeah, so adding tool.ruff extend select. Oh, let's see. So once these configurations are in place, then you don't tend to touch them again. There we go. So now, by adding this configuration where we're going to extend the rule sets that Ruff is looking for, by adding this, which in the documentation is explicitly adding all of the deprefixed rule sets. And just to clarify what that means, in their example earlier up here where they're talking about line too long, that is actually explicitly disabled at the start, but that lint rule is rule number E501. I think by default, most of the E's are enabled. So by adding up here or D for extend select, any rule set that starts with up or with D is going to be added in to the rules that Ruff is checking for, which now adds a couple of different errors that talk about missing doc strings, including a couple warnings here. And you see we have our D prefix here. No blank line before class, multi-line summary, second line, certain rules that it is looking for. And while you can't do it right here, actually that would be an excellent improvement, in my opinion, would be to have these be underlined so you can actually, wait a second, there we go. Oh, no, no matching results. It would be really cool if these could be linked out in a way. But things like our missing doc strings, and it doesn't really matter that what we put in the doc string because the rule set isn't going to check for that. There's a test backend. So if I just add the missing doc string in public module, if we rerun Ruff again, well, first line should end with a period. I've never seen that before. That's a new one. Should end with a period, question mark, or an exclamation point. Oh, this look okay. This is still docstring. In addition to just adding, hey, here is hey, you're missing doc strings. What PyDoc style was the rule set that it is attempting to utilize. Also has its own rules for how you style all of your doc strings. So I was starting off because I actually haven't used any like docstring like within the string checks before. So it has its own rule sets that says the first line of any docstring should end with a period and or I guess it got two and with a period question mark exclamation point. And I have a feeling that these two rules are seeing that it is both a docstring and it is a module docstring and might have differences of opinions depending on what type of docstring it is. Now, if I run this again, man, that is lightning fast. Found instead of finding 6 errors like we had before and then 7, we now have 5 errors. So in theory, even though they're not really descriptive, I could go to each one of these lines. So line 18 right here, and it's asking for that. And another one, don't really worry about the code here because we were just getting that was faking a database and getting things up and running. So I now have doc strings on all of these. I can run it. One blank line required after a class doc string, and that was right here. And now I'm just getting the warnings, and we're just going to ignore the warnings right now, and probably we can go into Ruff check into our help docs and see if there's a way to quiet warnings. And actually, there's a easier way to do that. I'm going to grep and do warning. Maybe there isn't. That actually, that's probably something that would go into, I don't know, like silence warnings or something in our pyproject.toml file. Um, I am curious adding PyUpgrade into this just because we wrote this project 2 years ago, and just seeing if I set the Python requires, and they have a different, yeah, so adding a project, I think, is like some way for Ruff to tell let's say we only want to run this on the not the latest and greatest because Python 3.12 just came out this at the start of this month, but I am curious just to see what happens once we add in our upgrade. Well, nothing. So perhaps there's nothing explicitly that is calling out saying, hey, we see you're using this, but now you don't need to do that anymore, which is what PyUpgrade is really meant to do. For example, I can pull up the other code base that we have here, and it is supporting Python 3.8 and above, but not including this one yet because there's a dependency that still requires 311. But I can go into just about any file here. Let's say this file, and I can point you to this line right here. From typing, import any iterable list optional tuple union. Uh, I can tell you that as of 3.9, Python 3.9, you won't need list or tuple anymore because 3.9 introduced the ability to, instead of using the typing list, to just use the collection itself, the collection type itself. So that's one thing that PyUpgrade or the upgrade capabilities of Ruff itself would be able to tell you about once you, in your pyproject.toml file, upgrade the minimum supported version that your project is able to support. So that's a lot of information, and a lot of the other things that we can look at for Ruff go into things like implementation or specific configuration of the linter itself. I would really love to know if there are any questions from you guys, anything that you'd like to see, or if you just have questions about linting in general. This isn't exactly a beginner. This isn't something that a tool that a beginner programmer might know about, but I think it would be an important tool, especially for a beginner or an intermediate looking to level up, to know about and really help because linting finds a lot of errors that you might not be aware of. It would have things like syntax uh, improvements, like, hey, did you know that you don't actually need a for loop here? You could do something else. These are a lot of things that linters have the capabilities to do. So we have one question in the chat. Have you used Ruff for a sufficient time to compare with AI and other automagical pair programming assistance tools like CodeGPT? And Sorcery. I've used Copilot a little bit. I have used Sorcery quite a bit as well. And while I haven't used Ruff for too long, I have been using Pylint for a very, very long time. Uh, So to that, I can say that the all of these tools are going to be a little bit um, complementary. The biggest thing, and the next question, I'll put the next question in here too. The demonstration uses a terminal for illustration. It's easy to add as an auto check, for example, when git committing. Uh, I think it's in here in integrations, perhaps. Yes. Ruff as a linting tool is an excellent tool to add into a pre-commit pipeline or hook. Now, pre-commit, if you don't know, is a tool that can be enabled on a per repository level to automatically run certain checks whenever you make a git commit. You can also add them as part of pushes into a CI/CD pipeline. And I will reference this project over here again because we do actually have a pre-commit config. So this config specifies all of the different tools that will be run potentially automatically, or at the very least notify you of problems every time that you commit. So really, you would just do, you'd have a file here, you'd have pre-commit, I think it's init or something to that degree. By the way, pre-commit is also just a pip install. It's just another Python tool, but it also works for other languages, which is pretty cool. So you can add Ruff as they show here. You can have just the linter, you can have just things like just the formatter, and have them automatically run. That's really cool. That is not something that you would use a pair programming Gen AI type tool to use. And actually over here, I can also just quickly pull up this GitHub workflow because we have a code quality thing here. So this is a task that would always run whenever like autobuild, perform code QL, that will always run the the linters. Here we're running our poetry pre-commit to check everything, and that actually gets run in this workflow before we go and run our tests, which is pretty neat. So you don't have to waste the CPU cycles for tests that are running if there is something in the code that does not pass muster, whether it's your code or more importantly, especially for open source projects or projects when you're on a team, whenever someone else makes a push into the repository, you'll always get these checks. The other, so that is one of the big benefits to using a tool like this is because you can have those automations. The other thing that you have with these tools compared to the pair programming assistance tools, these tools are not generative. They're following basic rule sets, but they're also lightning fast. They're free. You don't like Copilot is paid. Sorcery, not so much, but you're uploading your code you agree to upload your code to their servers so that they can check. That's also true for the Pylance server, by the way. They don't for if you're using the Pylance linter language server, and or any of the other language servers. They give you a lot of tools, but that is something you have to consider, especially if you are in an enterprise environment. If you're in an enterprise, you probably have a moratorium against using some of these tools. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom about pair programming tools and Gen AI here, but they're very different tools for their very different use cases. Linters are not going to generate code for you, they're going to help fix. And I will also point this out that you can have code generated by CodeGPT, CodePilot, whatever service that may still not pass your linting configuration. You may have something that doesn't have a doc string. You may have code that doesn't there's a whole bunch of really obscure things like I mentioned like a for loop. Rather than doing a for loop here, you can have there's a rule that's set up to saying, hey, we see you doing a like 4 item in list if thing return, and there's actually a whole rule to say that's actually a really bad block of code to run. You actually just want to use a Python built-in function called next, or it's not next, or it's first. I think it's first, and you just give it the iterable and a lambda to say if it follows this thing, and it returns it. Like it's things like that that a code generator is not necessarily going to do because it's looking at all of the both good and bad code uh, that has been generated in the world. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't use one tool or the other. Ideally, you use all of the tools that are available to you to write code that A works and B you are proud of and can read. All of which Ruff and these other linters and type checkers and code formatters can help you do. Any more questions? I know that's a lot. uh, message here. They are conflicted with tests that happen while I'm coding. Sometimes helpful, sometimes a distraction, especially when it's wrong. Uh, Automatic linting as a commit stage is very practical in some way that PyTest doesn't interfere while coding but does perform when it is ready. Absolutely. Now there is kind of a mix to this because if we're in here inside of our code editor, uh, we have the plugins, we have everything that's going. Um, I can type something like, import OS, and I can already like Pylance. It's a language server. That's what these things do. Is basic Pylance as a language server is providing real-time linting, but it's not going to catch everything. And unless you configure something like Pylance, that configuration lives inside of your development environment. It doesn't necessarily live inside of your tool set like you would have in something like pyproject.toml, which is going to be shared by tools on everyone's computer that is working on this exact same code base. So there is, again, it's using all of the tools that are available to you in the way that they best operate. So I can go in here and go, hey, OS is not accessed. I can see that as I'm working. If I'm being particularly egregious about things, I can do something like from OS import like ABC, something that really doesn't exist. Maybe that even gives me an underline. No, it doesn't. Like ABC dot text. It doesn't know what's going on, or maybe os.text. Come on, give me something. Actually, here, there we go. Uh, the so Pylance is telling me that this is not defined. It's going to give me all of these warnings, all of which can appear in here, in VS Code. This is really nice for real-time feedback. Seeing something like this, the code isn't going to run because it's just invalid syntax. I'm sure that this will tell me about that too, like undefined names, import is unused, all of these different things. Uh, so being able to see certain things in real time is being very useful. But the fact that this is linters and other tools, like, hey, I can go in here and I can run black on this code as well. And one file reformatted, and black would also be looking for its own configuration here, something like tool.black. May not actually have it installed in this particular. No, it was already installed. Yes, so we could have a go in here and look at other things. As an example, I can go back to here because I am pretty sure I do. Yeah, tool.black, so it can have its own configuration. And again, having a pyproject.toml, like a setup.py before, or even over here, I still have a .pylintrc. Including these configuration files inside of your code base means that everyone who's working on this code base is going to be referencing the same configuration. And like with if you're using GitHub Actions like we have up here before, all of this, like these can reference everything that is in here. We did have a talk either earlier this year or about this time last year. Oh, actually, no. It was also so the poetry talk that we had last year was a 2-in-1 because we used poetry to take care of our project details, and then we used poetry. Like here, we have actions to use poetry to create our virtual environment that we could then use in our workflows here, like running our pre-commit hooks. If if you're not familiar with, if you have code on GitHub and you haven't used Actions yet, I would highly recommend it. If there's something you do on an ongoing basis, almost certainly you can use Actions to automate that. For example, we have a dependencies auto updater, so it will work on a schedule. And here we just have a cron to say on the first at the start of every month, just go ahead and pull the code out, check for any outdated dependencies, and automatically create a PR on our code base to update those dependencies, as long as all the tests passed, for example. So that's something that you can use GitHub Actions for. And of course, we can also include these test and lint tools in here as part of that CI/CD pipeline. That's when you're getting into more advanced. So you're definitely getting out of beginner territory. You're getting into intermediate to advanced when you're talking about CI/CD pipelines for the most part. But a tool like Ruff or any other linter, for that matter, I think is a very good thing to introduce to someone who's gone through enough Python where they're not like they can read the language, maybe they know what a class is, and providing these helpful hints to them. Uh, and if you want to help one of these people, have them maybe make this pyproject.toml for them, because it might be a little intimidating at first glance. Can you use can you use prettier in with Python? Uh, yes. It's been a while since since I have looked at I know Prettier had its own yeah, like the opinionated code format. Uh, this is yes, you can use Prettier with Python. Um, I was referencing Black just because Black is very similar to Prettier. It's another one of these code formatting tools that is opinionated. By the way, Black is called Black because it is the reference to the Model T. You can have it in any color as long as it's black because it's opinionated. Um, but yeah, you can use Prettier with Python. I've seen it. I've seen it done. My preference is black, but I just like how Black outputs it. Uh, Ruff has its own formatter that if you don't want to use a separate one, it will do that for you as well. Although the documentation does point out that as a other than a couple of weird line length ones, he specifically made the Ruff formatter to mimic most of the ways that Black formats your code. Uh, Another question, we have PyCharm's linters and sonar stay out of the way whilst coding. However, there is an indicator or a dashboard overlaying top of the first line. We have red, yellow, green. Uh, when ready, can ask for problems or sonar tool window and will provide similar problem by problem description. These are dynamic, i.e. disappear from listening while when fixing the code. So I'm not as familiar with some of the tools that PyCharm has. Uh, they have they have quite a number of plugins as well, while just being an IDE as opposed to VS Code, which gets closer to being an IDE every day, but is still a text editor at heart. Um, it does sound like, well, since it does sound like Sonar, uh, since it is doing more work than just something like the Pylance server is doing, that it is waiting for a lull in your output in order to actually upload. Uh, Pylance doesn't give any kind of like, okay, we might actually be able to search in here. Let's say sonar. So we got sonar lint. Uh, I'm not as familiar. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. So we could use this potentially as a replacement uh, for the Pylance server. If you are on VS Code, I think comes as a bundled install by default with the Python extension, but you absolutely do not need to use it. You can always go in here and disable or uninstall it. Absolutely. Uh, but yeah, it's like since this is the one, this was acquired by Microsoft, I believe, which that's why that is. Uh, but yeah, if I'm most familiar with VS Code just because that is my go-to text editor. And frankly, unless we have conversations like this where we're talking about the tool set, the best tool sets, the goal of a tool set is to really just fade into the background, give you the information that you need, and and just let it do its thing. Uh, However, and like any language server, including the generative AI code assistance tools, if you are in an enterprise, if you're in a business where you may have a moratorium against certain Gen AI tools or security provisions that do not allow code to be uploaded to a third-party server, just be very careful about what you're using. This is on my personal computer, so I can have things in here like Sorcery, Copilot, uh, Pylance, all of these different external tool sets. If I wasn't in one of the situations, I would have to rely on tools like uh, Ruff or Pylint, um, MyPy, the Black, all these local tools that are configurable. Okay, another from the chat. Further related to fading into the background, is it better to go with an opinionated tool which makes changes without reference, or to be able to see what is wrong but take the time to decide? One, yes, one is speedy, and the other offers an opportunity for the human to learn. Absolutely. Um, I have seen I have seen it both ways. As a seasoned programmer, I prefer to just let it do its own. And if you have sufficiently large teams that are all working on the same code base, unless you really want to dig into your configuration, like a project that I was working on a TypeScript project for the longest time using TS-lint. We did have to go through and create an entire configuration, but once we agreed on the configuration, it was done. If you just say, hey, we want to use Ruff's defaults or we want to use Black, these opinionated tools, and prettier for that matter too, because it was mentioned earlier, these are opinionated. They have some things that you can do to adjust their configuration, but not as many. And it will just automatically take care of it. If I'm kind of two minds about the automatic formatting as compared to the prompt. I think if well, me personally, if I was starting over again, I think I would be okay with Black because if I just went a couple of lines and it just you get something to work, a function to work, and then run it with Black, and just see over time how it keeps formatting things, I think I would just continue to see that in the code that I continue to reference as I keep learning new things and referencing back to what I'd already written. Um, and just say, oh, that's the way it's supposed to happen. Especially if if you have a code formatter that just gives you the suggestions of doing such and such here, and you're making the same mistake over and over and over again. Uh, I'm going to put mistake in air quotes, which I actually think is quite apt because I used to use a lot of the single quote strings as opposed to the double quote strings as the default, and that's something that basically every automatic code formatter uh, replaces single quote with double quote strings unless there's a reason not to. Um, if you could use if you can use an auto formatter to constantly just replace the code that you are writing and just learn what the standard formatting practices are, I think that would be the best. But I guess yeah, your mileage may vary on that. Quick personal question, and I think this goes to the credentials that some people like to know. I've been programming now for almost 13 years. That's kind of weird to say. Yeah, almost 13 years. Coming up in January.
I had a question.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so a lot of these seem like time-saving tips. Is there anything else going on as far as like performance related for like ML applications?
So other than most linters are following rule sets. They're not doing advanced like they're not doing the same kind of things that these generative AI tools are doing, like Copilot and Sorcery. Those are looking at the broad swath of of the code out there and seeing certain patterns that are better replaced by other patterns. I think that's when you get into something like machine learning and actually improving things like the runtime, linters are not going to get you as far as those tools are, but they are going to catch a lot of the they are going to catch a lot of things that you might not that are either good for readability or things that will slow down your code that just may not need to be there. Uh, Something that will really that really helps out for things like machine learning, in my opinion, and APIs in general, is using a type checker like MyPy or Pyre or any of these other ones, um, because machine learning in particular can be quite affected by type mismatches. If the model input is expecting a string and it gets a number, you may have some weird spot in the code that is automatically converting one type to another in order to try to align with the model, and you'll get some weird results that you may not catch. Those kinds of things would be like that. That's what you would have a type checker for. Now, type checker is only as good as the types that you provide it. We don't really have like here, uh, providing types for all of your inputs and outputs and everything else. Um, but a linter is not going to speed up your it's not going to speed up your runtime necessarily.
So are you
Uh,
saying basically less hassle for the programmer?
yeah, yes. For example, a linter is going to be excellent at catching certain things that might cause your code to fail if you deployed bad code. They, these linting tools, these development tools are trying to help you weed out bad code. I have pushed way too many buggy builds to servers before and didn't really catch it until the code started running. Linters, type checkers, the, these tools are great for for trying to help you find like formatting errors or like unused imports, some things that will help speed up the code. But really, hey, this member does not exist on a class. That's a
Mhm.
common one. We don't even think about that anymore. Like I just did like, hey, we got like like app dot build, whatever. Build isn't a thing. Um, this isn't pulling it up, but I can see that my type checker is giving it any, which means it doesn't know what that is. If you tried, if you tried uh, printing, I don't know, well, it can print none, but like if I tried print, no, here's n, it doesn't know, like n doesn't exist. If we don't have the tools like Pylance or these language servers or Pylint and Ruff would catch this. But if I just tried pushing this code as is to a server and it goes to run it, it's going to give me a syntax error because it doesn't know what n is. That's the type of thing that these tools are trying to help you weed out while you as a developer are still looking at the code.
Okay, thank you.
Commented, I like to code in Notepad to force myself to learn without any auto formatting. My first code editor was Notepad, absolutely. uh, that is certainly one way to learn. And honestly, if I want to, I can type code into a just a plain text editor or just into like a text document nowadays. I got that, but when you're learning or if you're working with a code base that you're not familiar with, having all the tools available to you is a godsend. I can do app dot, hey, look, here's everything that is valid on this fast API app. Now, this isn't necessarily a linter, but this is a code analysis tool, and we should use all the tools available to us.